There are eye drops the doctor said she needs to use, not to mention a medicine for her nose. So I need to stop paying my bills. I get sad when I see all the other babies, all perfect when I walk down the street, and I ask myself, why only with me, God? What have I done to deserve it?
Her child will never be normal, and there's no known cure. It was actually doctors in northeastern Brazil who first noticed just a year ago, after a Zika outbreak, that there was a peak in the incidence of microcephaly. It took medical doctors another year to be sure that it was caused by the Zika virus, but they're now sure. And if you're a bring on the evidence type, check out this publication. So where did it come from? And how did it get here? And it is here. Like many of our viruses, it came out of Africa, specifically the Zika forest in Uganda. Researchers at the nearby Yellow Fever Research Institute identified an unknown virus in a monkey in the Zika forest, which is how it got its name. The first human cases of Zika fever surfaced a few years later in Uganda, Tanzania. The virus then spread through West Africa and east through equatorial Asia, Pakistan, India, Malaysia, Indonesia. But it was still mostly in monkeys and, of course, mosquitoes. In fact, in the 60 years between the time it was first identified in 1947 and 2007, there were only 13 reported cases of human Zika fever. And then something extraordinary happened. On the tiny Micronesian Yap Islands, there was an outbreak that affected fully 75% of the population. How did it get there? By air. Today we have 2 billion commercial airline passengers. An infected passenger can board a plane, fly halfway around the world before developing symptoms, if they develop symptoms at all. Then when they land, the local mosquitoes begin to bite them and spread the fever. Zika fever then next surfaced in 2013 in French Polynesia. By December of that year, it was being transmitted locally by the mosquitoes. That led to an explosive outbreak in which almost 30,000 people were affected. From there, it radiated around the Pacific. There were outbreaks in the Cook Islands, in New Caledonia, in Vanuatu, in the Solomon Islands, and almost all the way around to the coast of South America and Easter Island. And then, in early 2015, there was an upsurge of cases of a dengue-like syndrome in the city of Natal in northeastern Brazil. The virus wasn't dengue, it was Zika, and it spread rapidly. Recife, down the coast, a big metropolitan center, soon became the epicenter. Well, people have speculated that it was 2014 World Soccer Cup fans that brought the virus into the country, but others have speculated that perhaps it was Pacific Islanders participating in championship canoe races that were held in Rio that year that brought it in. Well, today, this is only a year later, the virus is being locally transmitted by mosquitoes virtually throughout South America, Central America, Mexico, and the Caribbean islands. Until this year, the many thousands of cases that have been diagnosed in the US were contracted elsewhere. But as of this summer, it's being transmitted locally in Miami. It's here. So what do we do about it? Well, preventing infection is either about protecting people or about eliminating the mosquitoes. Let's focus on people first. You can get vaccinated. You can not travel to Zika areas, or you can cover up and apply insect repellent. Well, getting vaccinated is not an option because there isn't a vaccine yet, and there probably won't be for a couple of years. Staying home isn't a foolproof protection either because we now know that it can be sexually transmitted. Covering up and applying insect repellent does work until you forget. So that leaves the mosquitoes, and here's how we control them now. spraying insecticides. The protective gear is necessary because these are toxic chemicals that kill people as well as bugs, although it does take quite a lot more to kill a person than to kill a bug. These are pictures from Brazil and Nicaragua, but it looks the same in Miami, Florida. And we, of course, can spray insecticides from planes. Back last summer, mosquito control officials in Dorchester County, South Carolina, authorized spraying of NALED, an insecticide, early one morning as recommended by the manufacturer. Well, later that day, a beekeeper told reporters that her bee yard looked like it had been nuked. Oops. Bees are the good guys. Well, the citizens of Florida protested, but spraying continued. Unfortunately, so did the increase in the number of Zika fever cases. And that's because insecticides aren't very effective. So are there any approaches that are perhaps more effective than spraying, but with less downsides than toxic chemicals? Well, I'm a huge fan of biological controls, and I share that view with Rachel Carson, author of Silent Spring, the book that is credited with starting the environmental movement. Now, exactly in this book, she tells the story as an example of how a very nasty insect pest of livestock was eliminated in the last century. No one knows that extraordinary story today, so Jack Block and I, when we were writing an editorial about the mosquito problem today, retold that story. And in capsule form, it's that pupae, that's the immature form of the insect, were irradiated until they were sterile, grown to adulthood, and then released from planes all over the Southwest, the Southeast, and down into Mexico and into Central America, literally by the hundreds of millions from little airplanes, eventually eliminating that terrible insect pest from most of the Western Hemisphere. Well, a real purpose in writing this editorial was to introduce readers to how we can do that today, not with radiation, but with our knowledge of genetics. Let me explain. This is the bad guy, Aedes aegypti. It's the most common insect vector of diseases, not just Zika, but dengue, chikungunya, West Nile virus, and that ancient plague, yellow fever. It's an urban mosquito, and it's the female that does the dirty work. She bites to get a blood meal to feed her offspring. Males don't bite. They don't even have the mouth parts to bite. A little company, British company called Oxitec, genetically modified that mosquito so that when it mates with a wild female, its eggs don't develop to adulthood. Let me show you. This is the normal reproductive cycle. Oxitec designed the mosquito so that when the male mates with a wild female, the eggs don't develop. Sounds impossible? Well, let me show you, just diagrammatically, how they do it. Now, this represents the nucleus of a mosquito cell, and that tangle in the middle represents its genome, the sum total of its genes. The scientists added a single gene that codes for a protein represented by this orange ball that feeds back on itself to keep cranking out more of that protein. The extra copies, however, go and gum up the mosquito's genes, killing the organism. Now, to keep it alive in the laboratory, they use a compound called tetracycline. Tetracycline shuts off that gene and allows normal development. Now, they added another little wrinkle so that they could study what happens. And that is they added a gene that makes the insect glow under UV light so that when they released it, they could follow exactly how far it went, how long it lived, and all of the kinds of data that you really need for a good scientific study. Now, this is the pupal stage, and at this stage, the females are larger than the males. That allows them to sort them into the males and the females. And they allow only the males to grow to adulthood. And let me remind you that males don't bite. From there, it's pretty simple. They take beakers full of male mosquitoes, load them into milk cartons, and drive around the city, releasing them, guided by GPS. Here's the mayor of a city releasing the first batch of what they call the friendly 80s. Now, I wish I could tell you this is an American city, but it's not. It's Piracicaba, Brazil. The amazing thing is that in just a year, it brought down the cases of dengue by 91%. That's better than any insecticide spraying can do. So why aren't we using this remarkable biological control in the US? And that's because it's a GMO, a genetically modified organism. Notice the subtitle here says if the FDA would let them, they could do the same thing here when Zika arrives. And of course, it has arrived. So now I have to tell you the short form of the long, tortuous story of GM regulation in the US. In the US, there are 3 agencies that regulate genetically modified organisms. The FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, and the USDA, US Department of Agriculture. It took these folks 2 years to decide that it would be the FDA that would regulate the genetically modified mosquito, and they would do it as a new animal drug, if that makes any sense. It took them another 5 years going back and forth to convince the FDA that this would not harm people and it would not harm the environment. They finally gave them this summer permission to run a little test in the Florida Keys, where they had been invited years earlier when the Keys had had an outbreak of dengue. Would that it were that easy. When the local residents heard that there would be genetically modified mosquitoes tested in their community, some of them began to organize protests. They even organized a petition on the internet with this cuddly logo, which eventually accumulated some 160,000 signatures. And they demanded a referendum, which will be conducted in just a couple of weeks, about whether the trials would be permitted at all. Well, it's Miami that really needs these better ways of controlling insects. And there the attitudes are changing. In fact, very recently, a bipartisan group of more than 60 legislators wrote to HHS Secretary Sylvia Burwell asking that she, at the federal level, expedite access for Florida to this new technology. So the bottom line is this: biological control of harmful insects can be both more effective and very much more environmentally friendly than using insecticides, which are toxic chemicals. That was true in Rachel Carson's time. It's true today. What's different is that we have enormously more information about genetics than we have then, and therefore more ability to use that information to affect these biological controls. And I hope that what I've done is aroused your curiosity enough to start your own inquiry, not into just GM mosquitoes, but to the other genetically modified organisms that are so controversial today. I think if you do that, and you dig down through all of the misinformation and the marketing on the part of the organic food industry and the Greenpeaces, and find the science, the accurate science, you'll be surprised and pleased. Thank you.
Thank you, Difficult is fun. Difficult is fun is one of my driving forces, my motto. If it's not difficult, it's not for me. You know, if it's easy, then someone else can do it. But when it's difficult, you need to challenge yourself. You need to step out of your comfort zone. And sometimes that challenge is closer than you think. It could be a life hack that you borrow from somebody else and you make it your own. And sometimes using that life hack can be difficult. Difficult, but fun. My name is Lisa Ekström, and I'm the founder of the company Kamoya. Kamoya is a word that I made up by myself. It originates from the Thai word kamoy, which means steal, thief. Steal, thief, snitch, or like borrow, you know, like borrowing somebody else's idea, somebody else's story of success, putting yourself as a lead character and making it your own story of success. Steal with pride. Kamoya. During a period of my professional career, I was sales manager at Scandinavian Airlines. I would say I had the kind of job where I was inside my comfort zone the whole time. You know, I could answer almost all the questions that I got. And if I got a question I didn't know the answer to, I would know exactly where within the organization I could find the answer. And then this girl walks into my office, a colleague of mine, and she says, you know, Lisa, what? They're looking for a new customer relations director. I think you should apply for the job. You know, the customer relations department was really the claims department, handling dissatisfied customers. Customer relation department. And there were two things well known within the organization about this department. One was that it was where people were placed when they lost their job. You know, like a dead-end job, like people were kind of dumped there. The other thing was that they had what we called a backlog situation, meaning that it took longer time for you as customers to receive answers on your claims than the standard promised. And the standard then promised 21 days. So you fly with the airline, you contact the claims department, you will probably get hold of somebody who was kind of dumped there. You know, out of the 28 who worked there, only 4 voluntarily applied for the job, and it will take more than 21 days before somebody gets back to you. And I remembered my motto, my driving force, difficult is fun, and I applied for the job. And you know, after some interviews and some negotiation, the job was mine. And I walked in there and I started by listening. I listened to my staff members. And you know, I have to tell you, at first I was so disappointed. You know, I had my expectations up so high. Difficult, difficult, difficult. But you know, they were all decent people. They put in their everything. But still, the results didn't reflect on the effort they put in. And very quick, I understood that we had to work in a different way. I mean, they couldn't work faster. They were working as fast as they could. They were cutting coffee breaks and they were skipping lunch. No, we couldn't work faster. We needed to change the way we worked, and we did. We also started doing other things differently, like not only focusing on the many dissatisfied customers we had, also focusing on the many satisfied customers we had. You know, some of them so satisfied, they would even go out of their way to write us emails to tell us about it. And we would always go out of our way and answer them. You know, there's so many companies that miss out on that. You have a happy customer, a satisfied customer telling you about good experience, and then you get no answer. I mean, if that's you, how does that make you feel? You tell the company that you're really happy, and then you hear nothing. We would always answer our happy customers with a thank you. And you know, at one point, we even sent cakes to some of them. Yeah, not all of them, but some of them, you know, with a cake, with a personal note saying that invite somebody for coffee and have cake. And maybe when you're having coffee and cake, you can talk about Scandinavian Airlines. Maybe you can find a way with suggestions that how we could improve. And then please let us know. You know, it was our way to ask the customer into our Scandinavian Airlines family. And we did a lot of things like that. Have you ever played computer games? Yeah, you know when you play computer games, there's like a life indicator in one corner, and then you're supposed to do things in a computer game that give life energy, and then you do something not that good, and that will take life energy, and if you do something really good, you can have an extra life. Well, I have a life indicator like that in my field of vision. Because you know there are things in my life that will take life energy, like focusing on dissatisfied customers all day. And then I need to fill up on energy, right? I need to find things that give life energy. Otherwise, I'll get game over. And for real, who needs game over? Nobody wants game over, right? So we did a lot of things to fill up on life energy. It was good for the customers, but it was also good for the staff members. And I can promise you, focusing on satisfied customers, bam, we got so many extra lives. And we did things differently. I mean, the cake thing was just one example. We did so many things like the cake thing. And when you do things that aren't really usual to do, you stick out your neck, right? You're a pioneer. And when you are a pioneer, that's difficult. Because when you are a pioneer, there will be people that think that you are crazy. And there will be people who think that you should be spending your time doing other stuff. So you need to create a company culture where you are brave enough to try. Brave enough to try new things, and also safe enough to fail. And we did. So, you know, some of it we came up with ourselves, and some of it we would come away from some other business that we read or heard about. And then I read this survey, I think it was from Denmark, saying that if you are an unhappy customer, you will tell, on average, 15 other people about your bad experience. But if you are a happy customer, a satisfied one, you will tell less than 5. You know, reading this, I thought, is that really true? Is that really how we are as people? Do we rather tell stories about bad experience than good ones? And at first I thought, no, we don't. And then I started listening. I listened to my friends and I listened to my colleagues. And after a while, I had to realize it was true. I heard more stories about bad incidents than about good ones. But still, you know, I thought we were kind of home free because we were also focusing on the many happy customers we had. So that was kind of a thing for others, not for us. And then I read this article. It was an article about a New York restaurant. You know, you go to a restaurant and you get your table, you get the menus, you order your food, you get your food, and you start eating. And in the best of world, the waiter will walk up to the table once you started eating and ask, is everything good? Sometimes, very often actually, they don't do that until you've finished your meal, and I mean, that's a bit too late, right? Then there's not much you can do about it. Maybe you can get like a free coffee or dessert on the house, and then you will leave the restaurant as a semi-satisfied or maybe even semi-dissatisfied customer. But this New York restaurant, this article was about something else. There was this couple who walked in, they got their table, they got the menus, they ordered their food, they got their food, they started eating, and once they finished eating, the waiter walks up to the table and he says, was everything good? You know, reading the article, I thought, well, a bit too late, right? They already finished their meal. But you know, the couple, they answered, no, it wasn't good. It was actually so much better than good. It was actually the best meal we've ever had. And I thought, 5, right? They will tell 5 other people about their good experience. But what the waiter did was so unexpected. You know, he took a deep breath, he smiled, and then he said it. He said, I am so happy that you are happy. I am so happy I will treat you your meal. You do not have to pay. Bam, right? A story is born. Not 5 anymore. The couple will tell more than 5 people. Even a journalist got hold of the story. He wrote an article, and here I am telling you about it. And I can promise you, I've told this story so many times. I thought it was so cool. I didn't tell it 5 times. I told it like 45 times. You know, it became one of those stories that I told so often that my children started to think that I was embarrassing. And when I told it like the 52nd time, my son, who was 7 at the time, he looked at me and he said, "Well, Mom, you should do that at Scandinavian Airlines." And I looked at him and I said, "Of course I will. Someday. You're so imaginative." But you know, he wouldn't give in. He kept talking about it, and I had so many explanations why it wouldn't work in my line of business. I had so many reasons, one better than the other. I mean, us not running a restaurant, just mentioning one. We were in a restaurant. But somewhere, all those explanations didn't feel okay. So I decided to Kamoya the New York thing and make it my own. Even though I had had so many explanations why it wouldn't work in my line of business, I realized that they were more excuses. Excuses, and I mean, where's the courage in that? So one early morning, I called my department. 7:30 Thursday morning. I called the department and I asked, "Do we have any email from a satisfied customer?" And my colleague said, "Yes." "You want me to read the email to you?" And I said, "No, just give me the customer's name and the phone number and I'll give her a call." And I did. And I think I woke her up, actually. I could hear she was sleeping. But I introduced myself. I said, "I'm Lisa Ekstrom. I'm calling from Scandinavian Airlines, and I heard that you had a good experience with us. Can you please tell me your story?" And she did. With great enthusiasm, she told me the story. She had been traveling from Manchester to Stockholm with her 2-year-old son. And you know, when you're 2 years old, you don't want to sit still in the stroller. You want to run around. And she had had so much luggage to check in. And she was so pleased with the help she received from the staff members at the airport. And when she finished her story, I took a deep breath. And I had a big smile on my face, and then I said it. I said, "We are so happy that you are happy. We are so happy we want to treat you your trip you do not have to pay." And the line went dead. Completely dead. You know, after like 10, 15 seconds, I had to say, "Hello, are you still there?" And she said, "Yeah, I'm still here. Can I call you back?" You know, that was not really what I expected. I had kind of expected my life indicator to hit the roof. But I was there feeling that my experiment was falling flat. But of course I said, "You can call me back." I gave her my phone number and I felt quite disappointed. And it took about 30, 40 seconds and then she called me back. And she said, "I thought it was a joke." She said, "Are you kidding me?" And you know, by that point, I was just this close on saying, "Yep, just kidding." But of course, I didn't. I said, "No, I am not kidding." So, when will you take somebody else's life hack and make it more than storytelling? When will you take something that somebody else is using and making it yours? Because you know, it's not the copying that's the difficult part. It's not the copying. It's the turning it around and adjusting and adapting it to suiting your business. When will you, Kamoya, for you and your business? You know, it takes courage to put yourself out there and try something you haven't done before. You need to create a company culture where you are brave enough to stick out your neck and try something you haven't done before. You need to create a company culture where you're brave enough to fail. And you need to surround yourself with people who support and roots for you. And most importantly, you need to be that person yourself. So remember, always remember, difficult is fun. Thank you.
often wonder why we call planet Earth, Earth, and not planet Ocean. I mean, nearly 3/4 of our planet is covered by water, and yet we know very little about this environment. I think all of you probably have at one point thought of the ocean, whether or not you consider it a source of recreation, transportation, or perhaps it's a home to mysterious creatures from the abyss. But few people think of the ocean as our life support. But that's exactly what it is. The oceans and its inhabitants represents our thermostat, our air filter, nourishment for millions of people, billions of people around the globe. Our lives are intimately connected to the ocean, and yet it's an environment we know very little about. Now, I've been excited about the ocean since a very young age. In fact, when I was in kindergarten, I declared my life's ambition of becoming a marine biologist. That is after briefly considering a career as a TV star. Now, I'm not quite sure where this passion came from, being the daughter of a physicist and an English literature teacher, but I suspect it had a little to do with my surroundings growing up in San Diego, where the beach was my childhood sandbox. So I had a pet clam. It's a little weird, I know. I rescued it from my parents' lobster boil. And I had a bedroom that was painted like the interior of a large aquarium. So fast forward 30 years, I'm still quite passionate about the ocean and marine life, except for the thing that I could not have anticipated was that the organisms I am most excited about are not the charismatic marine mammals and fish, but rather the life that you can't see with your naked eye, the marine microbes. So let me tell you about microbes. It's possible you've heard of them referred to by other names: germs, disease-causing agents, pathogens to be eradicated with antibiotics. These systems have been given a bad rap for over a century, but we're beginning to realize that these organisms are not our enemy, but maybe our greatest ally. And this change in public perception has been due in large part to the popularization of this concept of the human microbiome. That is, those billions of microorganisms that benefit us, that live within and on us, that keep us healthy. So if we throw our microbial partners off balance, that's when we get sick. And we're realizing now it's far better to be associated with a large diversity of microorganisms and inoculate often. So this connection between our health and well-being and our microbiome is not so surprising in retrospect, considering that all animals and plants evolved in intimate association with microbes. In fact, these single-celled organisms were the first on the scene. They evolved 3.5 billion years ago, well before we came into this earth. And they literally have shaped the planet that we know and enjoy today. So I remember the first time I laid eyes on a microbe. I was in college and some friends showed me some seawater under the microscope. Stained with a fluorescent dye, I remember being completely amazed at just how many cells there were in a small sample. It was like staring at the starry night sky in miniature, and it invoked in me the same sense of wonder and smallness that I often felt when staring into outer space. So perhaps even more impressive than the sheer number of microorganisms on our planet are the myriad of functions that they play in the environment. So just like the human microbiome is important for our health and well-being, the same is also true for Earth's microbiome as well. So let me introduce you to a few of the microbial players in the ocean that play an important role in the health of our planet. Oxygen. Okay, all multicellular animals need oxygen. So I want to take a moment and have you guys all take a deep breath. Oxygen produced by plants. Okay, so take another breath. Oxygen produced by marine microbes. You may be surprised, but 50% of the oxygen, that is every other breath that you're taking, was produced by microscopic life in the ocean that, like plants, takes advantage of the sun's energy. In fact, photosynthesis was an invention by microbes 2.4 billion years ago. And this singular innovation forever changed the chemistry of our planet. So these same microbes actually act like a giant sponge for the greenhouse gas CO2, and thus they play another important role in regulating our climate. By responding dynamically to light and nutrients, the oceans are literally breathing like an inverse lung. They're taking CO2 from the atmosphere and they're releasing back life-sustaining oxygen. So we know quite a bit about these microbial superheroes that live in the sunlit ocean because they live close to the surface. And we can even track their activity from space, as shown in this video here. But this activity zone of photosynthesis is a relatively thin skin compared to the total volume of the ocean, where the depths on average reach 2.5 miles. So this deep ocean, defined by complete darkness, frigid temperatures, and crushing pressures, is one of the largest environments on our planet today. And that's the environment that I study. Now, frankly, it's a bit shocking to me that in the year 2016, at a time when we are driving rovers on Mars, that less than 2% of our own deep ocean has been studied. It represents truly one of the last unexplored frontiers on our planet today. And I feel incredibly fortunate to have a career that allows me to be part scientist and part explorer of these remote but globally significant ecosystems. So you can imagine that studying an environment that's 2.5 miles down poses some unique challenges. And so to study these systems, we use manned and robotic submersibles to collect samples from the deep. And these technologies have enabled some amazing discoveries at depth. There are microbes in the deep sea that also play a role in consuming greenhouse gases. In this case, the gas is methane. It's a molecule that has 24 times the warming potential as CO2 in the atmosphere. And the deep sea houses tremendous quantities of this methane in a form of ice that's stabilized by the high pressure and low temperature found there. And we don't yet have a good accounting for just how much methane is there, but it's believed to be equal to or possibly even greater than all of the fossil fuels known on Earth today. So you may be asking yourself, if these deep methane sources have a potential role to play in climate change, why have I not heard about them before now? And the answer to that is the microbes. There are microbes that live in these same areas where you find these gas deposits, and they serve like an incredibly efficient biological filter. They consume the methane in the deep sea before it has a chance to get out into the atmosphere where its warming effect may take place. So the amazing thing is, given their great importance, these were organisms that we didn't know about. We didn't know their identity until about 15 years ago, silently doing their job in the deep sea. So recently, we've realized that these methane consumers are not solo diners, but rather they team up with other microbes that's depicted here in the pink and the green colors. And they cooperatively consume methane in the deep sea. You kind of think of it as a microscopic co-op of sorts. And so the scientific community is really beginning to unravel information about the identity and activity of microbes in a variety of different environments, but we don't yet have enough information that would allow us to predict how these organisms might respond to a changing climate in the future. Will they continue to absorb excess greenhouse gases, or are we going to push them beyond the limits of their capacity? Given that these organisms are typically the first responders and often can accelerate environmental change, the stakes for us are high. But just as we're investing in understanding our human microbiome, we also must invest in understanding how these microorganisms are affecting our planet. So it's an exciting and important time to be in the field of microbial ecology, and there's lots of good reasons to be hopeful because we're just barely beginning to scratch the surface of this mysterious world, and there's tremendous opportunity for potential discovery here. So I want to leave you with this parting thought. The next time you find yourself by the ocean, I want you to think of these microscopic powerhouses that are driving our planet. Take a deep breath and thank a microbe.
Zarówno dzisiaj, teraz, jak i codziennie zakrzywiamy czasoprzestrzeń, podróżujemy w czasie. No to Karolina, startuj z tą machiną.
Niech pomyślę. To ile się cofniemy w przeszłość? Jak myślisz? Ja bardzo lubię początek XX wieku.
No, tak, czyli 116 lat, tak?
No,
No dobrze, no niby fajnie, ale z drugiej strony jakby się tak spacerować na pobliski Kazimierz, to te 100 lat specjalnie wrażenia nie robi, bo będzie na to samo. Więcej?
no dobra, jak szaleć, to szaleć. 2000.
2000 lat. Czyli jak wyzwanie.
Damy radę?
No, jak żeście tyle czekali, to chyba tak.
Damy radę.
Zapraszamy na tą podróż szefie.
Tak cofając się w przeszłość, razem z Kingą policzyłyśmy,
I'm really excited to be.
You may have noticed by now that I'm really fat. And that's okay. You wouldn't be the first. Back in 1997, when I was in 7th grade, I heard a question posed about me in the locker room of my middle school. I sat hidden in a bathroom stall, hunched over, not wanting to give myself away, when I heard a girl ask, "When was the last time Whitney saw 90210? I was like more of a Saved by the Bell girl myself, and I'd actually never seen an episode of 90210, so I clenched my muscles and held my pee and waited with bated breath for the answer. And when it came, when she stepped on the scale, the girls erupted into laughter, and I felt the familiar sting of embarrassment seeping into my cheeks. It took me back to my 5th grade year on the soccer field where the boys had taken to singing a song about me called Baby Beluga that ended with, "She's got a whale of a tail." You might be picturing now how fat I probably was. It's easy to conjure up a mental image of an awkward girl spilling out of her shorts, running up and down the sidelines like, hey, I'm open. But if you have that mental image, you would be wrong. Because in 1995, when I was 10 years old, I looked like this. And when I look at that picture now, my heart aches because when I was just becoming aware that I had a body and that other people had opinions about my body, I became a statistic. Like 8 out of 10 10-year-olds who today are afraid of being fat. 10-year-olds, that's a real statistic. I bought the lie that diet culture sold me when I was 10 years old that told me if I am thinner, thin enough, then I will be happy. But at 10 years old, I felt the furthest thing from happy. And so the emotion that I most connected with my body was shame. After that, shame followed me like a shadow. And after the 90210 incident, I knew I had to take action. So I grabbed the handle of my father's toothbrush and shoved it down my throat until I vomited, and thus began my nearly lifelong battle with eating disorders. I continued to excel in school, to play sports, to dance. Shame and I won lots of awards and trophies. Sometimes shame was like a really overbearing adult begging for a piggyback ride, and other times shame trailed a few feet behind me, dragging its leash like a faithful dog, never leaving my sight. By the time I was 18 years old in 2002 and becoming a young woman, shame had solidified itself as my most faithful friend. It accompanied me to every dance performance, to every soccer tournament. It was even there in the bathroom with me at my prom as I hunched over a toilet and threw up my dinner just minutes before being crowned prom princess. When I moved to college that fall, I brought shame along into my dorm room, and I noticed that my body was changing. By the time I went home for Christmas break, I gained 50 pounds. And I'm thinking, like, okay, I'm an overachiever, so clearly the freshman 15 is just not enough. I was getting mysterious bruises all over my body, and I was like, why am I bumping into doorways and furniture? When did I get so clumsy? But then I realized I wasn't clumsy. My body was expanding so quickly that I had lost all kinesthetic awareness of it. My body literally didn't know how to fit in its physical space anymore, and similarly, I didn't know where I fit in the world. To say that my weight gain was difficult would be an understatement. By the time the second semester was finished, I gained nearly 100 pounds, and there was the sympathy from like the pretty girls who asked me if I'd like ever had a boyfriend. And then there was that one frat boy who had taken me on a dinner date in August. Granted, it was to Ruby Tuesday, but it was a dinner date. And when he saw me in March, he looked right through me like I didn't even exist. It was like I'd been forced into some social experiment against my will to put on a fat suit and parade about in public. The differences in the way that people treated average Whitney and fat Whitney were striking. Suddenly, I was assumed to be lazy, desperate, sloppy, stupid. And with every single pound that I gained, my self-worth continued to shrink further and further. So I became a different person after that. I quit my dance classes, I failed a lot of my academic classes, and in a world where it felt like being a fat woman was the biggest taboo, I didn't have anyone to talk to. Sure, there were times where I pulled myself up by the bootstraps and I said, I'm going to go to the gym, or I'm going to venture out to this party. But there was always a whisper, a dirty look, an insult to remind me why I didn't deserve to be in those spaces. So I would come back home to my apartment to the only friend that had never deserted me, shame. We would stay up late into the night commiserating, getting drunk to numb our pain. I'd order takeout for us both and do anything to avoid going out in a world that didn't want me. And of course, all the things that I had done to cope only compounded the problem, and I continued gaining weight. In 2005, I weighed 280 pounds, and my nurse practitioner swiveled her stool from in between my legs in the stirrups, checking her chart and announcing a little too cheerfully that she thought I had PCOS. Well, my mind started reeling because I did not remember learning about this STD in my 7th grade sex ed class. But the more I learned as I pored over the brochures and the pamphlets, and PCOS wasn't an STD. It was a syndrome, a grouping of symptoms with no cure that affects 1 out of every 10 women in America and is the leading cause of infertility. And then, like putting together a puzzle, other stuff started to make sense. The handfuls of hair that had come out in the shower, the coarse dark hairs all over my face, my period that had visited me only twice when I was 15 and never again, and of course my sudden and severe weight gain my freshman year of college. I didn't have an explanation for it then, but I had an explanation for it now. I was insulin resistant. So would life with PCOS make it impossible to lose weight? Absolutely not. Would it be even harder? Absolutely yes. And for a woman who wanted anything but to be fat, this felt like a death sentence. And then I got pissed off. I wondered, why have I never heard of this thing? I wanted to know why I'd always been dismissed when I went to the doctors, told that I was young and irregular, or I was drinking, or I was on Prozac. But out of all those emotions that I felt, the one I felt the most of was shame. So after college, I packed 2 suitcases, my clothes and shame, and I set off for Korea to teach English. I got promotion after promotion, and I traveled the world. Shame and I made it all the way to the top of the Great Wall of China. We ate sushi together in Tokyo. We vacationed in Malaysia and Vietnam. We even sunbathed in Bali. But all of these experiences that should have been so wonderful were tinged with that disgusting, insidious shame that sucked the life and the color out of my memories and left me nothing but black and white. And a never-ending wish to be thin so that I could really start my life. Now, living abroad wasn't all bad. I had some of the best experiences there. But the discrimination I faced was so much more overt than anything I'd had at home. I got laughed at, pointed at, and called a pig every single day in the street, in the store, in the nightclub. I'll never forget the first time I got in a taxi and the driver snorted at me for every mile until we reached our destination. Then there was the guy that swerved his bicycle dangerously close to where I was walking on the street, stopped pedaling, looked at me, said, "Pig," and then spit. I chased him, which was a futile effort, especially because he was in a bike, and I hurled every Korean insult that I could remember until I saw him vanish in the dark. And then I headed back to my apartment to cry. But it wasn't until I was assaulted in a bar, a man raced up behind me to start punching me in the back of the head, that I realized, hold up, I don't deserve this. It took such an aggressive, abusive action to jolt me into the realization that I was a fat human, but I was human. And I told myself, I'm going to go back home to the States, and I'm going to prevent this from ever happening to me again. I'm going to lose weight. So I moved back home in 2011. In 2011, I weighed 329 pounds. And I lost 100 pounds in 8 months. I worked out for 12 to 15 hours every week. I counted my calories. I obsessed. And I hid my shame from my personal trainer and from my family and from my friends, even from strangers who said, "You're remarkable. This is the hardest thing that anybody could ever do, and look at you doing it. I've never been more proud of you since the day you were born." Pretty soon, I was eating 500 to 1,000 calories a day, and I was throwing up everything I ate on Friday, which was my cheat day, and my eating disorder had returned in full force. One day I walked out of the gym having just run a few miles on the treadmill, and a car drove by slowly and lowered the windows, and they yelled at me, "Fat ass." When I climbed into my own car, dripping with sweat, what happened next was nothing short of a nervous breakdown. I had literally been working my ass off to do the one thing that everybody told me would fix it, the one thing that everybody told me would make me worthy. But that guy in the parking lot didn't care. He didn't know who, why, where I was, or what I had done to change. And I fantasized about losing the rest of my 100 pounds and thinking about my goal weight. But then all I could see was sagging breasts and loose skin and crow's feet around my eyes. And I knew intellectually that as long as I let my self-worth be determined in the eyes of others, I would never be content. But I could not disengage from the belief that I had to be thin to be happy. And so in that moment, all of my hope was extinguished. I had grown tired of the calorie counting, of the weight loss, of the obsession with everything food and exercise. I wanted something more to live for. So naturally, I got a job in radio where I had to wake up at 4 in the morning every day for minimum wage. And like the vast majority of people who lose a substantial amount of weight in their life, I started to gain it back. And within a year and a half, I was the heaviest I'd ever been. I was 350 pounds and in the deepest place of depression I'd ever known. I didn't have any money to pay my own rent, so I moved back in with my parents. And on my 29th birthday, I found myself sobbing in my mother's lap, lamenting about the dismal direction of both my professional and personal life. And I asked her, "Mom, how can anything ever change?" And my mother produced a pendant, and on it were the words, "Something good is going to happen." But in my misery, I was hyper-focused on one detail, and one detail only. When? So I started to reevaluate my life. I thought back to when I was 10 years old and 90 pounds, and now I'm almost 30 and over 300, and it hadn't mattered. I'd never been happy. I'd never loved myself. I'd always carried the weight of shame. So I decided to try an experiment, and I made a promise. I said, "Whitney, if there is something that you get asked to do and your only reason for declining is to say, 'because I'm fat,' then you are going to do that thing anyway." The universe was listening, because you better believe 3 days later, I got a message from a local photographer who told me she wanted to take some boudoir photographs of me for free. I wrote back to her immediately, "Sister, I would never in a million years take my clothes off in front of a camera, so when should I meet you?" A bottle of wine and a designated driver later, I got an unexpected result. When I looked at this picture, for the first time in my entire life, I didn't dissect every flaw. I didn't cringe, and in fact, I thought I was beautiful. So I decided to keep the experiment going. My coworkers at the radio station were trying to ask me to do a dance video and call it a Fat Girl Dancing and put it on YouTube. And at first my reaction was absolutely not, because no one has seen me dance since I was 18. Fat girls don't get to do that, and I'm still balking at the word fat. And I had to ask myself, "Whitney, of anyone on the planet, don't you know that being fat isn't synonymous with worthless, lazy, stupid, undeserving?" I wasn't sure that I knew, but I wanted to find out if I did, so I said yes. And I posted this video onto the internet, and a few days later, I started getting a lot of phone calls. But they weren't the normal phone calls, like from my dad asking me if I had toilet paper and stuff. It was like Steve Harvey and CNN, Good Morning America, and the Today Show. And they all told me they wanted me to come on their programs, talk about my dance video, and explain this new lifestyle, this new body-positive lifestyle that I was leading. And I couldn't understand, like, what is so special or subversive about a fat woman dancing? But I went on the shows, and I did my little dance, and then the letters started coming in. I got an email from a boy, a teenage boy in Lebanon, and he said, "Whitney, it's illegal to be gay here, and I'm gay. But when I watch your videos, I feel like my life is going to be okay." And I said, "Okay." And then after that, some more letters started pouring in. This one was from TLC, and they asked me if I would consider doing a reality show. And I mulled it over, and I thought about all the ways it could, like, ruin my life and my reputation, and all the ways it still might. But then I thought about that boy in Lebanon, and for every other person who had never turned on a TV and seen someone who looked like them, who struggled like them, and so I said yes. It wasn't before long that even more letters started pouring in, and many of them were from fat women, but just as many of them weren't. I was talking to little girls, anorexic women, people with different abilities, grandfathers that had always hated their noses. And then I realized, like, it's not about the fact that I'm fat. It's about the fact that I am living a shame-free life in spite of a society that tells me I don't deserve to. We all have something that society tells us we should feel shame about. For me, it's visible. In a world where thinness is championed above all else, where we tell women in no uncertain terms, if you are not young enough, thin enough, and pretty enough, you're disposable. Living in that world, deciding to love my body had become a radical act. And doing what I loved in that body had become powerful. And then became the inevitable questions from everybody, how is this doable? And I never used to know how to answer this question because I didn't know how to tell someone to be like me. But now I think I know how to tell people to be more like them. We think that we have to magically have confidence before we do something, but this is backwards. Confidence is a product of action, not the other way around. If I had to wait to have the confidence, I'd never get out of bed to do anything. I had to do the hard stuff, in my case, posing half naked and dancing. And then the confidence came as a reward, and the confidence came as a building block. But living authentically shame-free is not sunshine and roses. Every day on the internet and in my real life, I'm told that I am disgusting, delusional, and I should probably hurry up and have that heart attack I'm bound to have so the world will be rid of me. But living shame-free has also brought more joy into my life than I ever could believe existed. It has connected me with millions of people I would have never met face to face and injected the color and happiness back into my life. Now, I often think of one of my favorite quotes from my favorite feminist, Audre Lorde. She said, I am deliberate and afraid of nothing. And then I think back to this picture, 1989. 5 years old, before my first dance recital, this little girl was deliberate and afraid of nothing, serving up all the face and sass in the world, completely unapologetic about what she knew she was put on this earth to do. And I think we get discouraged because we've all been that little girl, but then the world beats and breaks us down. We think that being confident, being happy should be as easy as putting on a light switch, right? Just do it. Just be happy. Just love yourself. But it isn't that easy, and I know that. It's not like a light switch. Living authentically free of shame is more like stumbling toward a motion sensor light in the dark. You have to advance forward to a target that you can't see, but trust that you'll ultimately get there. And the universe is funny because the only thing that will turn that light on is your movement and your action. And if you live this way, if you know that every time you're stumbling and spinning and scrambling, you are actually doing the hard part, you are actually doing the work, even if you can't pinpoint your progress, if you make a commitment to live a shame-free life and know that it's an undertaking that you have to do every single day, day in and day out, and you are deliberate about choosing that life, you will find yourself illuminated. And if you're like me, it'll probably be when you least expect it. Thank you.
It's been said, if you never want to have sex again, get married. Sex is one of the most contentious issues in marriage today, second only to finances. There are many married couples that have not had sex for months, even years, and that's okay, as long as they're okay with it and happily married. The problem arises when one person in the relationship wants sex and the other doesn't. According to a national newspaper survey of approximately 10,000 respondents, mostly married men, 75% were satisfied in their relationship, but more than 50% were dissatisfied with their sex lives. We're having sex, don't get me wrong, we're just having sex at the wrong time and with the wrong people. I'll get to that later. We're having sex before we get married, 10 years on average. So we are effectively in a long-term relationship and potentially quite sexually bored before we even mess up the marital bed. And that has its consequences. Most brides today do not have sex on their wedding nights, and 50% of men would not have married their spouse had they known their marriage was going to be sexless. So, everybody wants to know just how much sex are married people